December 5, 1943. A cold wind cuts across the Atlantic as the Liberty ship SS John P. Altgeld pushes through grey waves toward New York Harbor. On her deck, huddled beneath American blankets, hundreds of German prisoners of war stare in silence. Their uniforms are torn, insignias removed, their faces drawn with exhaustion and disbelief. Only days earlier, they were men of the Afrika Korps, mechanics, gunners, drivers, serving the proud army of the Reich under Rommel's banner. Now they are captives crossing an ocean they had only seen on maps. U.S. Army transport records, deck 1943. The harbor looms like an iron mirage. Steel cranes pierce the sky. The dull clang of industry echoes across the water. From the decks, the Germans whisper in disbelief. Mile after mile of factories stretch beyond the docks. Smokestacks belching flame, trains clattering in endless rhythm, convoys of trucks surging through the mist. To men raised on rationing and scarcity, the sight feels impossible. One prisoner murmurs, "So this is how we lost." Bundesarchive POW interview transcript. The convoy slips past Staten Island as tugs guide the transport toward the pier. American guards, calm, confident, well-fed, move with quiet precision. The Germans expect derision, perhaps vengeance. Instead, they are processed like inventory in a vast, well-oiled system. Their names are typed into ledgers by clerks working in shifts. Their fingerprints taken by officers using electric machines that hum with power. Hot coffee is poured from steel thermoses by Red Cross volunteers. There is no chaos, no cruelty, only efficiency. American Red Cross Field Report 1943. The prisoners soon learn that this is not a temporary port of entry. Across the United States, the government has prepared an entire infrastructure to house them. Hundreds of camps from California to Georgia, built with astonishing speed. Within months, over 425,000 German prisoners will be living, working, and eating on American soil. U.S. War Department Circular No. 1, 1944. The logistics are staggering. Timber from Oregon, nails from Pittsburgh, concrete from Illinois, thousands of civilian contractors, soldiers, and engineers coordinated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It is an industrial miracle born not of desperation, but of abundance. For the Germans, the shock begins at the docks, but it deepens as the journey continues inland. They board sleek diesel locomotives, each painted in pristine olive drab, hauling miles of cars loaded with food, uniforms, and equipment. The trains glide past industrial cities, Buffalo, Chicago, St. Louis, each one roaring with production. Factories run day and night, windows glowing orange against the sky. The smell of oil and hot metal fills the air. They see women working riveting guns on aircraft fuselages, teenage boys loading freight cars, fields of wheat bending under automated harvesters. Office of War Information Dispatch, Jan 1944. In the Reich, Allied bombing had already reduced major plants to rubble. Coal was scarce. Locomotives starved for fuel. But here, everything runs on time. The Americans, one captured officer confides to another, are fighting with their factories. Bundesarchive POW letter, 1944. His tone carries both awe and fear. By the time the convoys reach the interior, the prisoners are settled into their designated camps. Some are placed in Texas, under skies so vast they seem unreal. Others in the pine forests of Alabama or the open plains of Kansas. Each camp is surrounded by barbed wire, but beyond it lie towns humming with life. Nearby they can see pickup trucks loaded with farm tools, grocery stores stocked with fresh produce, diners serving coffee and pie in porcelain cups. To men who survived on meager bread and ersatz coffee, it feels like another planet. Camp Hearn Journal, 1944. Inside the camps, the conditions are orderly, almost civilized. The Geneva Convention is meticulously observed. German officers retain their ranks and even their dignity. They receive mail, read newspapers, and attend classes organized by American staff. But it is the food that shocks them most. 3 hot meals a day, meat, bread, butter, vegetables, and milk. The same rations served to American soldiers. One prisoner later recalled, "We were better fed in America than our comrades at the front." U.S. Army Quartermaster Report, 1945. As weeks turn to months, the prisoners begin to notice patterns. The guards rotate smoothly, never short on supplies. Trucks deliver fresh uniforms on schedule. Even minor repairs, light bulbs, plumbing, generators, are completed within hours. The Americans seem to have a system for everything. a manual for every task, and an inexhaustible flow of materials. Army Service Forces Maintenance Bulletin, 1943. Among the prisoners, a grim realization begins to spread. This endless coordination, this invisible machinery of logistics, is why Germany cannot win. Some attempt to dismiss what they see as propaganda. "It's for show," mutters one sergeant, certain the abundance is temporary. Yet months later, when shipments of new vehicles, fresh guards, and more prisoners arrive, each process executed with the same mechanical precision, denial fades. The Reich had boasted of its blitzkrieg genius, but here the enemy wages war with mathematics, assembly lines, and rail timetables. Captured German interrogation notes, 1944. Then comes the work program. Under international law, enlisted POWs can be assigned labor, not in war industries but in agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure. The US seizes the opportunity. Across the Midwest, German prisoners harvest crops, build roads, and repair fences, freeing American labor for the front lines. They see firsthand the efficiency of American tools, tractors starting at the pull of a lever, electric saws powered by portable generators, irrigation systems turning deserts green. Each device, each process reveals a civilization that industrialized not for conquest, but for continuity. War Manpower Commission Field Report, 1944. To many, it is humiliating. To others, enlightening. A former Wehrmacht engineer, assigned to a Texas farm, writes in his diary, "Their machines do the work of 10 men. It is not only their power, it is their organization." Bundesarchiv, Engineer POW Diary, 1944. In the evenings, when the prisoners listen to faint radio broadcasts from Europe, they hear of the destruction of Hamburg, the retreat from the Eastern Front, the shortages of fuel and ammunition. And still, here in America, the trains roll past every night, laden with tanks, trucks, and food for millions. The contrast gnaws at their pride. By late 1944, the illusion of German invincibility collapses completely. The men who once believed in the Reich's destiny now see its limits measured against America's boundless capacity. They begin to question not only their cause, but their understanding of power itself. "We thought victory was courage," writes one captured officer. But here, victory is calculation. U.S. Strategic Intelligence Center, POW Psychological Evaluation, 1945. Winter deepens. Snow blankets the camp fences. The distant whistle of a freight train echoes across the prairie. The prisoners gather in silence, watching the horizon flicker with the light of unseen factories. Somewhere far beyond their reach, America's assembly lines continue their rhythm. Presses stamping steel, welders sparking against hulls, engines roaring to life. The sound seems endless, like the pulse of a continent at war. And yet the Germans have only glimpsed the surface. They have seen the machines, the food, the transport, but not the deeper secret driving it all. For behind every factory, every rail line, every ration crate lies something far more powerful than manpower or material, an unseen network of organization, engineering, and innovation that no Axis planner had ever truly understood. The prisoners will soon learn that America's might is not measured only in tons of steel or barrels of oil, but in the hidden systems that bind them together. The secret did not lie in the mountains of steel or the rivers of oil. It was in the wires, in the radio waves humming across the continent, in the blueprints drawn under fluorescent lamps in Detroit, Chicago, and Schenectady. America's true weapon was not just its factories, but the invisible machinery of coordination that linked them all. War Production Board Memorandum, 44. In 1940, while Europe burned, U.S. engineers at firms like Western Electric, General Motors, and Bendix were already preparing for a different kind of war. They built not just tanks or planes, but entire systems of logistics. Machines that talked to each other, rails that met at the right junctions, depots that knew precisely what each front needed before the orders even arrived. It was the first taste of what would later be called networked warfare. Office of Production Management Report, 1942. The German prisoners had seen the end products, trains arriving on time, food never running out, but they could not comprehend the machine behind the machine. Inside America's War Department, a vast computational bureaucracy pulsed with data. Every bullet, every ration, every gallon of fuel had a destination. logged on punch cards and processed by IBM tabulators. These early computers, hulking, humming beasts of brass and wire, ran the arithmetic of victory. U.S. Army Signal Corps Technical Bulletin, 1943. Factories became extensions of this network. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant, directed by Chrysler engineers, could assemble one M4 Sherman every 55 minutes. The River Rouge complex, run by Ford, produced B-24 bombers at the rate of 1 per hour. Every bolt, every piece of steel, every gallon of paint was tracked and moved through a schedule of terrifying precision. War, declared industrialist Charles E. Wilson, is logistics. War Production Board Annual Report, 1943. The prisoners, assigned to farms and rail crews, began to see how the American economy itself had been weaponized. When they helped load freight cars marked Ordnance Corps, they saw the seamless coordination of civilian and military labor. They saw standardized parts, interchangeable, identical, predictable. Germany's war machine relied on craftsmanship. America's thrived on replication. Army Service Forces Engineering Report, 1943. Meanwhile, back in Europe, German commanders struggled to comprehend how the Allies maintained endless supplies. General Alfred Jodl, in a private note recovered after the war, wrote that, "Our logistics fight a giant with one hand tied." Captured OKW documents, 1945. He was right. For every German tank rolling off the line, America built 10 and shipped them across oceans without missing a beat. Nowhere was this industrial dominance clearer than during Operation Cobra, the Allied breakout from Normandy in July 1944. As the Germans dug in behind hedgerows and rubble, American engineers and logisticians built entire highways overnight. Bridges were erected from prefabricated Bailey sections, each piece numbered and fitted like a puzzle. Supply trucks marked with white stars roared forward in endless convoys. 5-ton GMCs, their engines pounding like thunder across the French countryside. After-action report, U.S. First Army, July 1944. Behind those convoys was a miracle of planning, the Red Ball Express. Nearly 6,000 trucks, driven mostly by African-American soldiers, formed a rolling artery of fuel, ammunition and food stretching from the Normandy beaches to the front. Operating 24 hours a day, the convoy moved over 12,000 tons of supplies daily. When a truck broke down, mechanics were on site within hours. Spare parts came from depots whose inventories were updated daily via coded radio. Transportation Corps Report, 1944. The Germans, relying on horse carts and rail lines constantly bombed by Allied planes, were stunned by this speed. In post-war interrogations, captured officers described it as war by mathematics. One panzer commander, whose unit was destroyed near Mortain, said bitterly, "We could fight their tanks, but not their numbers." U.S. Army Intelligence Center, POW debrief. 45. Every truck in the Red Ball carried a coded marking. Every driver a map printed the night before. Traced by Signal Corps clerks in Paris. Fuel depots, maintenance shops, and rest stations were pre-positioned along the route. Nothing was left to chance. Technical Manual TM 55-200, 1944. Even the coffee served at refueling points came from quartermaster units operating like factories in the field. The precision of it all reflected the same principle that had built the Liberty ships, tanks and rifles, system over chaos. Back in America, this precision was born of human hands and brilliant minds. At Bell Laboratories, engineers refined field radio designs so rugged they could withstand shellfire and rain. Motorola's engineers built the SCR-300 walkie-talkie, the first true portable FM transceiver, operating at 40 MHz with a range of 5 miles, transforming how platoons communicated. Signal Corps Equipment Specification, 1943. For the first time in history, field commanders could coordinate armor, infantry, and artillery in real time without cables or couriers. Germany, by contrast, relied on short-range AM sets prone to interference. The fog of war that once favored blitzkrieg now turned against them. American armor units maneuvered fluidly, while German divisions, cut off by disrupted lines, found themselves blind. "We were fighting ghosts," a captured German tank officer later admitted. Bundesarchiv POW interrogation, 1945. The prisoners who once mocked American simplicity began to see the genius in it. They were engineers, mechanics, and soldiers trained in the precision of German craftsmanship, hand-fitted pistons, polished optics, intricate designs. But as they watched American tractors repaired in minutes with spare parts stamped in Milwaukee, they understood. The Americans had built a war machine where complexity was tamed by uniformity. Army Ordnance Training Film, 1944. During the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, this invisible network proved decisive. On December 18, 1944, as German forces surged through the fog, Allied commanders scrambled to respond. Roads were clogged with snow, radios jammed and units scattered. Yet within 48 hours, the US Army rerouted thousands of vehicles, supplies, and reinforcements from across France. Fuel shortages, the Achilles heel of any army, never crippled the Allies. The Red Ball convoys shifted routes dynamically, guided by radio reports and coded teletype messages. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Operations Summary, DEC 1944. By contrast, German fuel columns froze on the roads, their tanks idle, their crews scavenging for abandoned Allied supplies. In one infamous episode, SS officers disguised in US uniforms hijacked gasoline trucks, an act of desperation that underscored their logistical collapse. Wehrmacht Fuel Allocation Memo, DEC 1944. When the offensive failed, it was not just from lack of courage, but from the sheer inability to match the industrial rhythm of the enemy. The secret to that rhythm lay in America's engineering philosophy, decentralization. Factories across 48 states could produce interchangeable components for a single tank or rifle. If one plant was delayed, another could fill the order within days. This redundancy made sabotage impossible and shortages irrelevant. Engineers like K.T. Keller at Chrysler and William Knudsen at General Motors coordinated vast networks of subcontractors, each tied into a national schedule managed by the War Production Board's logistics algorithms. War Department Production Data 1944. German prisoners working in American sawmills and foundries began to sense that this system extended everywhere. They saw trains loaded with identical crates labeled M1 Carbine 10EA, rations Type C, spares engine block. Even the labels followed a standard pattern. It was a world designed not for beauty but for velocity. Army Quartermaster Corps Packaging Standard, 1943. For the first time, they grasped that America's war effort was not a matter of willpower. It was a civilization scaled for war. Every citizen, every factory, every farm was a gear in a single machine. Its engineers, accountants, and laborers were as crucial as its soldiers. The German officers, trained to value the warrior above the worker, now faced a truth they could not unlearn. In modern war, industry is the army. When the Red Ball Express finally wound down in late 1944, the numbers told the story. Over 150,000 men, 6,000 trucks, and 400,000 tons of cargo moved in less than 3 months, without the loss of a single day's operation. Transportation Corps Final Report, 1945. It was not a battle, but a revelation, a demonstration that victory no longer belonged to those who fought hardest, but to those who planned deepest. And as the prisoners stared across the camps at night, watching freight trains howl past in the darkness, they began to wonder, if this was the enemy's backline, what force must be moving at the front? Because the true scale of American power, the full coordination of land, sea, air, and industry, was about to crush the Reich from every direction. By 1945, the machine had reached full power. Across 2 oceans, America's industrial arteries pulsed without pause. Tankers sailing west toward the Pacific, freighters east toward Europe. The sound of engines, of pistons and turbines and assembly lines had become the new heartbeat of the world. And the German prisoners, scattered in camps across the United States, were witnessing not merely their captors' strength, but a civilization transformed by war itself. U.S. War Department Strategic Logistics Survey, Feb 1945. For many of them, the revelation came slowly. When they arrived, they had expected vengeance. Instead, they found structure, predictability, efficiency, even generosity. They were paid in coupons redeemable at camp canteens. They received medical care, dental checkups, and access to libraries stocked with American and German books. The U.S. government understood something profound. Morale was not just a weapon for soldiers. It was a weapon of civilization. Geneva Convention Compliance Report, 1944. It was through these small human exchanges that the prisoners saw the full dimension of America's strength. The guards were often high school teachers, factory foremen or clerks before the war, ordinary men doing extraordinary things with quiet competence. Their rifles were clean, their uniforms pressed, their orders calm. They fight with order, one German POW wrote in disbelief, not with hatred. Bundesarchiv, Prisoner Diary, 1945. That discipline, replicated across millions, was what had built the arsenal that broke the Reich. In the fields, the prisoners worked alongside American farmers, men and women who operated tractors as powerful as small tanks. They watched harvesters that needed only one driver to reap what had once taken entire platoons of laborers. They saw radio dispatchers coordinate shipments hundreds of miles apart, or through a national grid of telegraph and telephone lines. To men raised under ration stamps and blackout curtains, it was surreal. The industrial miracle was not just military, it was social. U.S. Department of Agriculture Report, 1945. Behind every meal and machine stood an army of engineers and technicians, the quiet architects of victory. In Illinois, metallurgists perfected new alloys for tank armor. In Connecticut, Pratt & Whitney workers hand-fitted turbine blades for the engines that powered the B-29 Superfortress. In California, women at Douglas Aircraft riveted bomber wings at record speed, working under floodlights that turned night into day. Office of War Information Photo Archive, 1944. Each rivet, each bolt, each calculation became part of an unbroken chain that stretched from factory floor to battlefield. This was not the chaos of desperation seen in German production, the shattered plants, the scattered labor, the constant improvisation under bombing raids. America's system was shielded by geography and energized by abundance. When one plant failed, another took over within days. When a ship was sunk, two more were launched. A kind of relentless optimism drove the process, the belief that nothing, not even war, could halt production. War Production Board Statistical Review, 1945. The prisoners began to talk among themselves, not of escape but of understanding. Engineers among them marveled at the American methods. Soldiers spoke of the moral weight of such efficiency. Some even began writing essays and sketches for camp newsletters, analyzing the American way as a new kind of warfare, one fought not with ideology, but with organization. Camp Clinton POW newspaper, March 1945. Even the defeated began to feel the strange gravity of admiration. They fight with their hearts in the factories, one prisoner wrote. Every worker here is a soldier, and every machine a weapon. Bundesarchiv POW letters, 1945. It was not the might of one man or one general, but of millions acting as one. That realization began to erode the very myths the Nazi regime had built its power upon. Meanwhile, American military psychologists were studying the prisoners carefully. Reports from the U.S. Strategic Intelligence Center noted that exposure to the American system had demoralizing but enlightening effects. POWs who had seen the vast infrastructure of supply, the endless food, the well-organized labor, often expressed disbelief and even shame at Germany's arrogance. They could not understand, the report noted, how a nation of so many races and beliefs could act with such unity of purpose. U.S. Strategic Intelligence Center Psychological Assessment, 1945. The engineers and logisticians behind that unity rarely appeared in headlines. Men like Major General Brehon Somerville of the Army Service Forces, who built the logistical framework of global war, or Donald Nelson of the War Production Board, who marshaled civilian industry into the largest supply chain in history. Army Service Forces Command Report, 1945. To the German prisoners, these names meant little, but their impact could be seen in every rail line, every ration box, every rolling convoy that never stopped moving. When the war finally turned decisively against the Reich in the spring of 1945, many prisoners already knew the outcome before the news arrived. They could measure defeat in the silence of broken factories, in letters from home that spoke of hunger and bombed-out cities. By contrast, their own surroundings buzzed with life. American towns near the camps hosted fairs, movies, and dances. Children played in parks under electric streetlights. Civilization itself seemed untouched by war. Their cities are alive, one prisoner confessed. Ours are tombs. Bundesarchiv, POW letter collection, May 1945. Even after Germany's surrender, the lessons continued. Re-education programs introduced POWs to American newspapers, democracy lectures, and films showing the liberation of concentration camps. Many prisoners were stunned, not only by the atrocities, but by the American decision to show them openly. In Germany, such things were hidden, one officer wrote. Here they are shown so that none forget. U.S. Army Information and Education Division Report, 1945. For some, the transformation was profound. Thousands of POWs would later choose to remain in the United States after repatriation, returning years later as immigrants. They had seen something more enduring than military power, a moral and industrial order that promised stability. They understood that the war's true victory lay not just in destroyed armies, but in preserved ideals of discipline without tyranny, productivity without slavery. Department of State POW Repatriation Summary, 1946, Psychologists Studying Returning. POWs noted recurring descriptions: cleanliness, abundance, fairness, efficiency. The words repeated across diaries and debriefings like incantations of disbelief. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Morale Division, 1946. For the Germans, defeat had stripped away illusions. For America, victory had confirmed a philosophy that democracy, when organized, could outproduce dictatorship. Freedom, guided by science and coordination, had proven more efficient than fear. And this revelation did not fade with the war. The logistical doctrines developed by men like Somerville and the engineers of the Red Ball Express became the blueprint for Cold War strategy. The U.S. Air Force's global refueling networks, NATO's standardized ammunition and equipment, even modern just-in-time manufacturing, all trace their lineage to that wartime synchronization. U.S. Army Quartermaster Historical Study, 1947. The industrial symphony that humbled the Reich evolved into the backbone of the post-war world. When American engineers built highways, they followed the same logic as wartime convoys. When IBM developed mainframes, they drew from the punch card systems that once moved artillery shells. The lessons learned from total war became the DNA of peace and the foundation of a global order powered by logistics and trust. As the last German POWs were repatriated in 1946, many left with conflicted hearts. Some kissed the ground of the camps that had housed them, leaving hand-carved souvenirs behind. Others stared silently from train windows as the American countryside rolled past. Factories smoking, trains howling, people working. They were going home to ruins, carrying with them the image of a nation that had defeated them not by cruelty, but by coordination. U.S. Repatriation Command Report, 1946. In one surviving letter, a former prisoner wrote from Bremen to a friend still in America, "You do not understand what you have built. It is not your tanks or your planes. It is the faith that every man, from the farmer to the general, is part of one machine, and that machine runs on trust." Private Correspondence Collection, 1947. He was right. The story of the German prisoners was not just one of defeat, it was a revelation. They had glimpsed the engine room of democracy, where freedom and order worked side by side. They saw that America's might was not measured in gun barrels, but in gears, wires, and willing hands. In the end, the prisoners carried home more than memories, they carried a warning and a lesson. That modern war belongs not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who organize the fastest. That the true battlefield is not the front line, but the factory line. And that in the age of machines, victory favors the nation that builds together. Because as one American engineer wrote at the war's end, "The power of a free people is not what they destroy, but what they can build without fear." U.S. War Department Closing Address, 1945.